Between 1854 and 1862, 23 young nuns walked through these gates, alive with faith, and vanished, as if God himself turned his back on the house that bore his name. The fog that morning was not ordinary fog. It moved like something alive, thick, wet, and deliberate, curling around the black iron gates of the old lumber baron's estate, as if it wanted to keep the world from seeing what was about to happen inside. It was October 12, 1854. Lake Michigan lay iron-gray under a sky the color of ash, and the first carriage, pulled by two exhausted horses whose breath steamed in the cold, rolled to a stop beneath the shadow of a mansion that should never have become a convent. Limestone the color of old bone. 3 wings spreading like the ribs of some great dead thing. A bell tower that looked less like it was reaching for heaven, and more like it was warning heaven to stay away. Bishop William Corder stepped down first, boots crunching on frostbitten gravel. Behind him, 23 women in black habits descended one by one. Most barely past girlhood, cheeks still round with Irish country air, eyes wide with the terror and thrill of having crossed an ocean for God. They did not know yet that some of them would never cross back. They did not know that the ground beneath this place had already drunk blood long before the first foundation stone was laid. Blood of Ojibwe massacred in 1836, blood of lumberjacks who froze to death in the woods, blood of a baron's young wife who hanged herself from that very bell tower in 1849 after discovering what her husband did to the servant girls in the cellar. The church bought the land cheap. They always do when the ground is cursed. The locals watched from a distance that first day, German Lutherans and Scandinavian Methodists standing at the edge of the tree line, hands buried in coat pockets, breath fogging like ghosts of their own suspicion. "That place is wrong," old Elijah Hoffman muttered, spitting tobacco into the snow. "My grandfather felt it the first winter he logged these woods. Said the trees screamed when the axes bit. Now the papists are moving in. Mark my words. God will not suffer idols on haunted ground." His neighbor nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the black line of nuns processing toward the chapel door. 23 brides of Christ, walking straight into a mouth that had been waiting a very long time to close. Inside, candlelight trembled across fresh-plastered walls that still smelled of lime and death. Mother Superior Catherine Murphy stood at the altar like a statue carved from ice. 42 years old, 6 feet tall in her stockings, eyes the pale blue of glacier water, beautiful and cold enough to burn. When she spoke, every nun felt it in her marrow. "The Lord has called us to a hard land," she said, voice low, precise, carrying the clipped authority of Boston's oldest convents. "Here, sacrifice will not be a word. It will be the air we breathe." Behind her, Sister Elizabeth Foster smiled the way a mother smiles at children who do not yet know they are about to be hurt. Plump, rosy, hands that had soothed 100 orphans, and would soon sign away their souls for 30 pieces of silver. And beside her, Sister Margaret Clark. Tall, skeletal, fingers stained faint green from the herbs she grew in a locked garden no one else was allowed to enter. Her eyes never blinked when she looked at you. They weighed. They measured. They decided what you were worth alive, and what you might be worth dead. The youngest among them was Sister Agnes O'Connor. 22, golden hair hidden beneath her veil, skin still kissed by the sun of County Kerry. She clutched her mother's wooden rosary so tightly the beads left dents in her palm. She had no idea that in less than 6 months that rosary would be found buried under the herb garden, crusted with something darker than soil. But that first night all any of them felt was awe. The chapel smelled of fresh beeswax and pine. Stained glass, simple, newly shipped from Cincinnati, painted the flagstones crimson and gold. The crucifix above the altar was enormous, hand-carved, the corpus so realistic that several younger nuns crossed themselves when they thought no one was looking. Christ's eyes, painted by some forgotten Bavarian monk, seemed to follow you when you moved. They would follow the nuns for the rest of their short lives. The rule of St. Mary's was severe from the very first bell. Matins at 3 a.m., ripped from sleep by the bronze tongue of a bell that sounded less like a call to prayer, and more like a death knell dragged across the sky. Bare feet on freezing stone, knees on unforgiving kneelers, 7 times a day the liturgy dragged them back to the chapel, until their voices grew hoarse and their fingers bled from turning pages of heavy breviaries. Between the hours, work. The orphanage filled quickly. 12 children by Christmas 1854, mostly Irish, mostly orphaned by the railroad or the sawmills. Tiny coffins were common in those years. Sister Elizabeth rocked the living ones and measured the dead ones for shrouds with the same gentle smile. The infirmary grew a reputation. When the influenza came in January, Sister Margaret's willowbark tinctures and opium lace syrups saved dozens of Protestant lumberjacks who would rather have died than owe their lives to popery. Even Elijah Hoffman sent his grandson. The boy lived. Hoffman left a ham on the doorstep and never spoke of it again. But inside the walls, something was shifting. You could feel it the way you feel a storm long before the first drop of rain. It began with silence. The recreation hour, 45 minutes after supper when the rule allowed quiet conversation, grew quieter, then silent. Sisters who once laughed softly about homesick memories now stared at their bowls of watery soup as though the potatoes might hear them speak. It continued with penance. A whispered word during the grand silence. A moment's distraction during mental prayer. A sigh that was judged too worldly. Punishments that had once been gentle. A chapter of the rule read aloud. An extra decade of the rosary became cruel. Kneeling on dried corn kernels until blood soaked through stockings. Hands held over candle flames to burn away the sin of touch. One sister forced to lick the chapel floor clean after spilling holy water. Because your clumsiness profaned the house of God. Mother Catherine watched it all with those glacier eyes. And always, always the prettiest ones suffered most. Sister Agnes wrote home in February 1855. The cold here is a living thing, ma'am. It crawls inside your bones and makes its home there. My fingers are cracked and bleeding from the laundry. We wash in water drawn from the well before it has time to thaw. Mother Catherine says pain is the gold that buys heaven. Sometimes I am afraid we are paying too much. She signed it with a little cross, and never mentioned that 3 nights earlier she had been made to sleep in the cellar as punishment for dropping a communion paten. The cellar with the locked iron door. The cellar that smelled of wet stone and something coppery underneath. Spring came late that year. The ice on Lake Michigan broke with a sound like the world cracking open. And that was when the first sister disappeared. April 17, 1855. Sister Agnes O'Connor did not come to matins. Her place in the choir stalls was empty. Her veil did not flutter when the draft swept under the chapel door. 22 voices chanted where 23 should have been. At breakfast, Mother Catherine folded her hands and announced, Sister Agnes has been called urgently to the mission at Traverse City. The bishop feels her youth and gentle spirit are needed among the Ottawa children. She left before dawn so as not to disturb our prayer. No one saw her leave. No one heard a carriage on the gravel. Her cloak, the heavy wool one her mother had woven, was still hanging on its peg in the dormitory. Sister Bernardet Walsh, her best friend since the ship from Queenstown, dropped her spoon. It clattered like a gunshot in the frozen silence. But Reverend Mother, she said nothing to me. Mother Catherine's pale eyes fixed on her. Are you questioning divine providence, sister? The refectory held its breath. Sister Bernardet lowered her gaze. No, Reverend Mother. That night, in the herb garden under a moon the color of bone, Sister Mary Collins found something half-buried where the new mint was planted. A single wooden rosary bead, carved with the tiny letters A.O.C. She hid it in her sleeve and did not sleep again for 3 days. 3 months later, Sister Bernardet herself was gone. Called to Chicago, Mother Catherine said smoothly, to assist with foundlings. Again, no goodbye. Again, the cloak left behind. By Christmas 1855, 5 young nuns had left for missions. Their families wrote letters that came back unopened, or, if opened, containing replies in handwriting that was not their daughters. One mother in Galway received a note that said, I am happy in my new work. Do not trouble yourself about me again. The handwriting expert hired 70 years later would swear on a stack of Bibles that every single reply from every missing nun was written by the same hand. Sister Margaret Clark's hand. By 1856, the fear inside St. Mary's had teeth. Sisters walked in pairs now, even to the privy. They slept with scissors beneath their pillows. They learned to recognize the sound of Mother Catherine's footsteps in the corridor. The soft, deliberate drag that meant someone had been chosen. And always the same type disappeared. The beautiful ones. The gentle ones. The ones whose laughter had once filled the recreation room like birdsong. Sister Teresa Donovan was next. Strong as an ox from years milking cows in Tipperary, she had never learned when to keep her mouth shut. One July evening, as thunder growled over the lake, she cornered Sister Mary in the laundry. "Mary, listen to me. They're not sending them away. I've seen the cellar door open at 2 a.m. I've heard sounds. Dragging. And once, God forgive me, I smelled blood through the floorboards." Sister Mary's hands shook so badly she dropped an entire stack of clean altar linens. The next morning, Sister Teresa was gone. "Contemplative retreat in Montreal," Mother Catherine announced, buttering her bread with serene precision. She left by night boat. That was the morning Sister Mary found the note under her pillow. A torn page from Teresa's breviary. Scrawled in desperate ink. "If I vanish, tell Father Ryan at Holy Name in Chicago. Tell him the cellar eats souls. Tell him Mother Catherine is not a bride of Christ. She is the devil's banker." Sister Mary burned the note in the kitchen stove that same hour. But the words were already branded on her heart. Outside the walls, the world saw nothing. St. Mary's limestone glowed warm in the sunset. The chapel bell called the hours with mournful faithfulness. Grateful farmers left baskets of potatoes and salt pork on the doorstep. Inside, 23 had become 12. And the herb garden grew richer every spring. No one ever noticed that the soil there was darker, softer, as though something beneath it kept the frost from ever truly hardening the ground. Slow zoom on the locked garden gate. A single white rose blooms out of season, its petals veined faintly red. Voiceover barely above a whisper. In the book of Revelation, the Lord warns that he will spit the lukewarm out of his mouth. But what happens when the shepherds themselves grow cold and start selling the lambs to wolves in human skin? This is only the beginning. 23 names, 23 souls, and a convent that would spend 160 years trying to bury the truth 6 feet deeper than the bodies already were. The winter of 1857 to 58 was the coldest anyone could remember. Lake Michigan froze so hard that men drove ox carts across it from Wisconsin to Michigan. Wolves came down from the north and devoured livestock in broad daylight. And inside the limestone walls of St. Mary's, the devil collected his rent in flesh. Sister Mary Collins had not slept through a single night since overhearing the conversation outside Mother Catherine's office. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep. Every shadow in the corridor was Sister Margaret coming for her with one of her green-stained syringes. Every dream ended the same way. Golden-haired Sister Agnes on her knees in the locked herb garden. Mouth open in a scream that had no sound because the earth had already filled it. Mary knew what they were doing now. She had seen the benefactors. Well-dressed men from Chicago and Milwaukee who arrived after dark in unmarked carriages. Their faces hidden beneath beaver hats and silk scarves. Men who never attended Mass. Men who were escorted by Mother Catherine herself to the North Wing, the wing that did not officially exist on any convent plans filed with the diocese. She had seen the money, thick envelopes pressed into Mother Catherine's hand. Gold eagles that clinked like Judas's 30 pieces when the Mother Superior counted them later in the chapel. Alone, beneath the painted eyes of a suffering Christ who could no longer look away. And she had seen the cellar. Only once. In February, sent to fetch winter apples, she had taken a wrong turn in the dark and found a second staircase. Hidden behind a false panel in the pantry. The steps went down farther than any cellar had a right to go. The air that rose from it was warm, thick, sweet in a way that made her stomach turn. She had fled before the darkness could look back at her. But the worst, the thing that finally broke what remained of her courage, was the night they took Sister Rebecca Murphy. January 14, 1858. Mary had been awake, rosary beads cutting into her palms, when the footsteps stopped outside Rebecca's cell. 3 sets, Mother Catherine's measured tread, Sister Margaret's quick, bird-like shuffle, and a third heavy, male impatient, Rebecca's muffled sob. A sharp command, "Walk, or we carry you." Then the sound of a body hitting the floor, a dull thud, the dragging, and finally, worst of all, the soft, wet sound of cloth being pressed over a mouth until the struggling stopped. The next morning Mother Catherine had smiled like winter sunrise over the refectory table. Sister Rebecca has been called to the Dakota missions. The native children need her gentle heart. Sister Mary had stared into her porridge until the world went gray. She knew then, if she did not act, she would be next. March 3, 1858, Egg Collecting Day. The only hour in the week a junior sister was allowed outside the enclosure alone. The chicken coop stood 50 yards beyond the kitchen garden, half hidden by drifting snow. Jimmy Fletcher, the milk boy, was late that morning. His draft horse had thrown a shoe. When he finally appeared, cheeks raw from wind, Mary was waiting. She did not waste time. Her frozen fingers pressed a folded scrap of paper and her silver confirmation cross into the boy's mitten. "Father Thomas Ryan at St. Joseph's," she breathed, her voice barely louder than the wind. "If you tell anyone else, they will kill me. Do you understand, Jimmy?" The 12-year-old looked at the cross, small, tarnished, warm from her skin, and something ancient passed between them. "I understand, sister." He hid both note and cross inside his coat, against his heart, and never spoke of it again until he was 78 years old and dying in a veterans' hospital in Milwaukee. Father Thomas Ryan received the relics 2 hours later. He was hearing confessions when Jimmy slipped through the side door of the sacristy, eyes wide, cheeks still wind-burned. The note was written on a torn page of a missal. Mary had nothing else. "Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns are disappearing. They are not sent away. I have heard them taken at night. I fear I am next. For the love of God and His blessed Mother, help us. Sister Mary Collins." Father Ryan read it 3 times. Then he folded it small, placed it inside his breviary next to the Gospel of Luke, and went to the tabernacle. He stayed on his knees for 1 hour. When he rose, his decision was made. He would not go through Bishop Henney. He had already tried that road once, in 1856, and been sent away with vague blessings and a warning about scandal. Henney was building his cathedral. Mother Catherine's gold was helping pay for the marble. Ryan saddled his horse and rode north through mud and melting ice to Milwaukee anyway, but this time he carried something the bishop could not ignore. A terrified boy, a silver cross, and a note written in a shaking hand that still smelled faintly of convent soap and terror. Bishop Henney received him in the new episcopal residence. Warm, perfumed with beeswax and ambition. The drawings for the cathedral lay spread across the table like a battle plan. Ryan waited until the bishop finished admiring a sketch of the future high altar. Then he laid the silver cross on the velvet cloth, right on top of the archbishop's coat of arms. Henney's smile froze. "8 nuns gone, Your Excellency. This boy brought me proof. One of them is begging for her life." Henney picked up the cross with 2 fingers, as though it might burn him. "Mother Catherine has explained every transfer," he said carefully. "These are hard times on the frontier. Illness takes many." "Then let us visit the graves," Ryan answered, voice shaking with rage. "Show me where they are buried." The bishop said nothing. After a long silence, he handed the cross back. "I will pray about this, Father." Ryan understood. The cathedral needed another $40,000 before the marble could be shipped from Carrara. Mother Catherine's envelopes were thick. He left Milwaukee the same day, colder than when he arrived. But God, it seemed, had not entirely abandoned the women of St. Mary's. On March 28, 1858, a telegram reached St. Joseph's Parish House, sent not from Milwaukee, but from New York. Archbishop John Hughes, Dagger John, the fighting Irishman who had faced down nativist mobs with a pistol in each hand, was coming west, not in person, but his personal secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, was already on the train. Hughes had read Ryan's desperate wire and remembered another convent scandal in the 1830s. Nuns buried alive in Montreal. He would not let Wisconsin become another Charleston or Montreal. He gave Kelly absolute authority and 3 simple orders. Go unannounced. Break down every door. Bring me the truth, even if you have to dig it out of the ground. April 17, 1858. The Feast of Saint Perfectus, Martyr. The clerical party arrived at dawn. Monsignor Kelly, 56, silver-haired, face carved by famine and Atlantic crossings, rode in the lead. Father Ryan beside him. 2 older pastors from Green Bay and Fond du Lac followed, grim-faced. The convent gates were locked. For the first time in 4 years, a single raven sat on the cross above the bell tower and screamed at the sky. Mother Catherine met them in the courtyard herself. She had lost 20 pounds since winter. Her cheekbones jutted like blades beneath skin the color of tallow. But the glacier eyes were unchanged. Monsignor Kelly, she said, bowing with icy grace. We were not informed. You were not meant to be. Kelly dismounted, boots hitting the gravel like a judge's gavel. By order of Archbishop Hughes, this convent is under immediate visitation. Every room, every ledger, every soul, living or dead, will be accounted for before sunset. Step aside, Mother. Something flickered across her face. Panic, calculation, hatred, then was gone. She stepped aside. The search began. They found the children first. 7 orphans where 23 had been reported. Half-starved. Eyes too old for their faces. 1 little girl, Bridget O'Toole, age 9, clutched Father Ryan's cassock and whispered in Gaelic, They take the pretty sisters away at night, Father. They never come back. In the infirmary, 3 ancient patients and rows of empty beds. In the chapel, dust thick enough to write sins in. In the kitchen, the great stove roaring though the day was mild, and 2 young nuns frantically feeding armfuls of paper into the flames. Monsignor Kelly snatched 1 sheet before it burned. A ledger page. Names. Dates. Payments. Sister Agnes O'Connor, $800. Sister Bernarde Walsh, $1, $200. Sister Rebecca Murphy, pending. And beneath each name, a single chilling notation in Sister Margaret's spidery hand. Delivered to Dr. Elias Greenwood, Chicago. Condition: virgin, unblemished. Father Ryan felt the world tilt. They went to the north wing together, Kelly, Ryan, and the 2 pastors. Sister Elizabeth tried to block the corridor. Her plump face had collapsed into itself. The maternal mask was gone. You mustn't, she whimpered. He'll kill us all. Who? Kelly demanded. She only shook her head, weeping without sound. They pushed past her. The locked door at the end of the hall was new oak, banded with iron. Kelly did not ask for the key. He took a fire axe from the corridor bracket and brought it down 3 times. The lock shattered. The smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies. Blood. Fear so thick it had weight. Then the light spilled in. 5 women knelt or lay on filthy straw. Their habits hung in rags. Their faces, once bright with Irish laughter, were skulls wrapped in gray skin. Sister Rebecca Murphy was nearest the door. She had been beautiful once. Now her cheekbones were blades, her eyes sunken pools of darkness. When she saw Father Ryan, she tried to smile, and her lips split and bled. You came, she croaked. I prayed every day. Behind her, Sister Josephine Brady, 25 years old, knelt with her hands pressed to an abdomen grotesquely swollen beneath the remnants of her habit. 8 months pregnant. Her rosary beads were embedded in the flesh of her palms. She had clenched them so long the wood had grown into her skin. The other 3 sisters, Claire and Benedicta, were barely conscious. One had cigarette burns in perfect rows across her forearms. Another's tongue had been cut out. Monsignor Kelly, an old man who had buried cholera victims and baptized babies in famine ditches, fell to his knees and vomited onto the stone floor. Father Ryan could not move. He stared at Josephine's belly and understood, with a clarity that burned like lye, exactly what the doctor did with the women they sold. Dr. Elias Greenwood of Chicago, respected physician, pillar of society, silent partner in the most exclusive brothel west of New York, paid premium for virgins. And when the merchandise proved less than satisfactory, he made improvements, or disposed of it quietly in the lake. Rebecca crawled forward on broken nails. They keep us alive, until he wants us, she whispered. Some of us fight. They give us to Mr. Callahan then. He's very strong. She lifted what was left of her sleeve. Bruises in the shape of a man's hand circled her arm like a cuff. Father Ryan took off his cassock, his only warmth, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Behind them, Mother Catherine's voice rang out, cold as winter iron. Monsignor, these women are under strict penitential discipline. Their accusations are the delusions of mortified souls. Kelly rose slowly. He was crying, but his voice did not shake. Catherine Murphy, by the authority vested in me by His Grace Archbishop Hughes and the Holy See, I place you under arrest for crimes against God and man. You will be taken to New York in chains if necessary. Mother Catherine smiled then, a small, terrible smile. You are too late, Monsignor, she said softly. The doctor left at dawn, with 2 more. She turned her glacier eyes on Father Ryan. And Sister Mary Collins went with him willingly. She finally understood her true vocation. Ryan felt something inside him die. The last thing he saw before the world went black was Sister Josephine reaching for him with blood-crusted fingers, whispering through cracked lips, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, and they made my sin grow inside me." Screen fades to black. A single heartbeat, slow, arrhythmic, then silence. Voiceover, bare whisper over the sound of ravens. 5 women rescued, 18 still missing. And beneath the herb garden, the dark earth waited patiently for spring, when the frost would melt, and the truth would finally bloom. The smell inside the locked room did not fade for weeks. It clung to Father Ryan's cassock like a second skin. It soaked into Monsignor Kelly's beard. It lived behind their eyes every time they closed them. Human filth, blood gone sour. And beneath it all, the faint sweetness of Sister Margaret's chloroform. Sweet the way a corpse flower is sweet right before it rots. They carried the 5 survivors out one by one. Sister Josephine had to be lifted like a child. Her legs would no longer hold her. The child inside her kicked against the hands of the priests as if it already knew the world it was being born into was cursed. Rebecca refused to let go of Father Ryan's sleeve. "They told us we were brides of Christ," she rasped, lips split and bleeding. "Then they sold the wedding night to the highest bidder." Monsignor Kelly sent the other 2 priests to tear the convent apart brick by brick. And brick by brick, St. Mary's confessed. In Sister Margaret's hidden infirmary, behind a false panel that swung open only when you pressed the carved eye of a plaster saint, they found the pharmacy of hell. Rows of brown bottles labeled in Latin. Laudanum, chloroform, oil of Savon used to murder the unborn. A jar marked Virgin Blood, Sister Agnes. 1855. Floating in cloudy alcohol like a saint's relic. On the shelf above it, a leather journal bound in human skin, tanned so thin you could almost read the tattoos of the lumberjack it had once covered. Inside, Sister Margaret's neat, surgical handwriting. Sister Bernarde Walsh resisted sedation. Required 40-minute restraint. Mr. Callahan reports, spirited. Client paid extra $200 for the struggle. Delivered Chicago, September 1855, $1,200 total. Sister Teresa Donovan, unbroken after 11 sessions. Strangled November 3, 1856. Buried East Bean Row. No commission waste of good merchandise. At the bottom of one page, a single line in red ink. The master is pleased. They found the money next. Iron safe hidden beneath the chapel altar, directly under the feet of the crucified Christ whose painted eyes had watched everything. Inside, $107,400 in gold certificates and bank drafts, enough to build 3 cathedrals, and the ledger that matched every coin to a soul. 23 nuns, 17 orphan girls aged 12 to 16. 1 column for the date they disappeared. 1 column for the price. The highest price, $1, $800, was paid for Sister Claire O'Donnell, age 19, noted for voice like a seraph, skin like moonlit milk. The lowest, $0, was Sister Mary Collins. Entry dated April 16, 1858. Terminated after attempting escape with note. Buried North Herb Garden. No commission, but the doctor was furious. Says she scratched his face. He kept the pieces of skin under glass. Father Ryan read that entry and vomited onto the marble floor of the sanctuary. Then he went outside and began to dig. They all dug. Priests, deputies, even the local Lutheran farmers who had once spat at the sight of habits now worked shoulder to shoulder with shovels and picks. The garden fought back. Every spadeful released a stench of rich, black soil soaked in things that should never fertilize life. They found the first body at dusk. Sister Teresa Donovan. Still wearing her veil, the cord that killed her knotted so tight it had fused with the flesh of her neck. Her rosary was clenched in her teeth. She had bitten through the wooden beads in her final agony. They found Sister Mary Collins the next morning. She had been buried face down, arms twisted behind her back, still clutching the torn page she had tried to send the world. The ink had run, but they could still read. Tell Father Ryan. The cellar eats souls. They found 4 in total that week. The rest, 19 souls, were gone. Sold south on riverboats. Branded with new names. Some already dead of the pox in New Orleans cribs. Some chained in the back rooms of charity houses. In Chicago, where men paid $50 just to watch a former nun pray while they violated her. The survivors told the rest. Piece by piece, in whispers, because speaking it aloud still felt like sin. Mother Catherine Murphy had never been Mother Catherine Murphy. The real Mother Catherine, 42, gentle, devout, had died 3 weeks after arriving in Wisconsin. A cup of evening tea laced with arsenic from Sister Margaret's private garden. They buried the real superior in the cellar the same night, poured quicklime over her, and the woman who stepped into her habit the next morning was someone else entirely. Her real name was Catherine Leary, former madam of a Boston brothel burned down in the 1840s for excessive cruelty, even by that city's standards. Sister Elizabeth Foster had been Margaret Wilson, her procuress. Sister Margaret Clark had been Catherine Donovan, no relation to murdered Teresa, an abortionist wanted in New York for killing 3 society wives. They had done it before. In Philadelphia, in Baltimore, always the same pattern. Infiltrate a convent, kill the real superior, sell the pretty ones, bury the fighters, vanish with the gold when the noose got too close. Only this time they had grown greedy. This time they had stayed 8 years. This time they had built an empire on the bodies of brides of Christ. The clients were the elite of the Midwest. Judges who sentenced prostitutes to the workhouse by day and paid to rape nuns by night. Legislators who thundered against Catholic immigration on the Senate floor while keeping former sisters in private apartments. A bishop, name redacted in every surviving record, who wrote personal checks for pregnant virgins, habit optional. When the civil authorities finally arrived, the birds had flown. Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret were gone from their locked cells. No broken windows, no forced doors. Only a single white rose left on each pillow, veined faintly red, like something grown in blood-rich soil. Sister Elizabeth remained. They found her in the chapel at 3 a.m., kneeling before the altar, rocking back and forth, whispering the same words over and over. He's coming. The Master is coming. I was only the banker. I was only the banker. They carried her to the Wisconsin State Asylum in chains disguised as rosary beads. She never spoke a coherent sentence again. Only screamed at night about the man with no face who owns the dark. The church moved faster than the law. Bishop Henny was retired to a Trappist monastery in Belgium before the first newspaper story broke. His successor burned 90% of the records. The convent was razed to the foundations in July 1858. The limestone sold to build a Protestant church. The land deconsecrated in a secret ceremony where Archbishop Hughes himself drove a silver stake through the high altar and whispered, "Let this ground forget the name of God." The surviving nuns were scattered like ashes. Sister Josephine's daughter, born healthy, dark-haired, with her mother's eyes, was taken from her arms screaming and placed with a family in Pennsylvania who were told the mother had died of fever. Josephine hanged herself in the mother-house laundry 3 years later. Her last letter. I hear her crying every night. They told me it was for the best. There is no best. There is only hell with better architecture. Rebecca Murphy refused the gag of silence. In 1865, under the name Rachel Martin, she published The Dark Convent. 2,000 copies printed in Cincinnati before church agents bought and burned everyone they could find. A single copy survived, hidden in the floorboards of a Quaker library. In it she wrote, "They did not just sell our bodies. They sold the idea of our bodies. The fantasy that holiness could be purchased, violated, and discarded. And the church helped count the money." Father Ryan was exiled to a parish above the Arctic Circle in Minnesota. He kept digging anyway. Every spring he sent letters to Rome, to newspapers, to anyone who would listen. They all came back unopened or not at all. His last journal entry, January 1886. Tonight the aurora looked like blood on snow. I thought of the herb garden. I thought of the girls we never found. If God is just, Catherine Leary is burning. If God is merciful, she is burning slowly. And if God is silent, then we are all still inside St. Mary's. The official story, the one that made it into Catholic encyclopedias, was simple. St. Mary's Convent closed due to financial irregularities and an outbreak of consumption. No bodies were ever mentioned. No names were ever spoken again in any church on earth. But the farmers who bought the land swore the beans grew strangely sweet for years afterward. And old women in the county still cross themselves when they pass the empty field and whisper, "That's where the brides are buried." Sometimes, on windless April nights, you can stand at the edge of those forgotten acres and hear it. Not wind, not wolves. 23 voices, soft as convent choirs, rising from the soil. Agnus Dei, qui tolli peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Have mercy on us. The camera pulls back slowly from the empty field. A single white rose, impossible in winter, lies crushed on the ground, petals bleeding faint red onto the frost. Voiceover barely audible. They silenced the witnesses. They burned the books. They plowed the graves under. But the ground at St. Mary's still remembers every name, and one day, when the church is ready to hear its dead, the garden will speak again. Screen fades to black. 23 names appear one by one, handwritten in blood-red ink, then vanish like smoke. They never caught the wolves. They only scared them south. Catherine Leary, once Mother Catherine Murphy, and Catherine Donovan, once Sister Margaret Clark, slipped through the fingers of the church, the law and history itself like smoke through a confessional grate. But the ground remembers. And sometimes, decades later, the ground decides to speak. For 24 years, the two women lived like ghosts with money. New Orleans, 1859. Havana, 1861. Veracruz, 1864. Always the same pattern. A beautiful old hacienda bought with gold that still smelled faintly of Wisconsin soil. A sign hung out front, Colegio de Santa Maria para Señoritas. A locked north wing, and a garden that grew richer every spring. They were older now. Catherine's glacier eyes had yellowed with malaria. Margaret's skeletal fingers were twisted with arthritis. But the hunger never aged. The girls came from mountain villages, orphans, runaways, daughters sold for a few pesos and the promise of an education. They left the same way the Wisconsin nuns had, drugged, defiled, delivered. And always, in the margin of Margaret's new journal, the same 3 words in red ink. The master waits. No one knows who he was. Some said a Mexican general who liked them in habits. Some said a defrocked Jesuit who believed he was purchasing absolution one virgin at a time. Some said something that had never worn a human face at all. The girls who resisted were buried beneath avocado trees. 12 bodies were found in 1912. There were probably more. The end came quietly, on an evening in 1880 when the jacarandas were bleeding purple across the courtyard. The servants found them the next morning. Catherine and Margaret seated opposite each other at the little tea table, cups raised in a mockery of polite conversation. lips shriveled back from teeth frozen in identical, courteous smiles. Poison from the same plant Sister Margaret had once used on the real Mother Catherine in 1854. The cups were still warm. On the table between them lay the locket. Inside, a miniature of St. Mary's Convent in flames, hand-painted by Margaret herself the week they fled Wisconsin. The final journal entry, in Catherine's shaking hand, "He came at twilight. He was not pleased. We have failed him for the last time. We drink together now. One last communion." They buried the bodies in unmarked graves behind the Hacienda Chapel. The Mexican authorities, well paid, forgot the case in a week. The church sent a quiet telegram to New York. "The Wisconsin matter is concluded. Requiescant in pace," or whatever passes for peace in hell. But the story was never concluded. It only went deeper underground. Back in Wisconsin, the survivors rotted in silence. Sister Josephine Brady's daughter, named Mary Grace by the Pennsylvania family that raised her, grew up never knowing why she screamed whenever she saw a nun's habit. She died unmarried in 1923, leaving a single photograph of herself at age 6 clutching a rag doll and staring at the camera with eyes that had already seen too much. Sister Rebecca Murphy Rachel Martin spent the rest of her life hunting the network. She died in a San Francisco boarding house in 1897, surrounded by newspaper clippings, train tickets, and a map of North America covered in red pins marking convents that were not convents. Her last letter, never sent, was addressed to the Archbishop of Chicago. "You moved the wolves. You did not kill them. They are fatter now." Sister Sullivan lived to be 89. She never stopped writing letters to every bishop in America. Quiet, polite, relentless. In 1899, on her deathbed, she asked the novice tending her to burn every reply she had ever received. The girl counted them first. 211 letters. 0 answers. The church's final solution was simple: erase the site, scatter the witnesses, and let time finish the burial. By 1908, the land where St. Mary's stood was a cornfield. By 1930, it was a suburb. By 1970, children were riding bicycles over the exact spot where Sister Teresa Donovan had prayed her last rosary with a rope around her neck. But the dead have long memories. In 1912, the Veracruz bodies were identified by a single survivor, Sister Claire O'Donnell, by then a broken woman living under an assumed name in a Philadelphia almshouse. She recognized the locket from a newspaper photograph. She mailed the clipping to the Archbishop of Milwaukee with no note. Just a single line scrawled on the margin in shaking pencil. "You let them die twice." The Archbishop burned the clipping that same day. In 2018, during excavation for a new cul-de-sac called Convent Crest Lane, a backhoe operator uncovered a rusted metal box 6 feet down. Inside, a rosary made of Job's tears seeds, a square of black veil stiff with old blood, and a water-stained list of 23 names written in Sister Mary Collins's careful convent hand. At the bottom, in different ink added much later, "They never found Agnes. They never looked." The box was turned over to the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. It has never been catalogued. Researchers who ask too many questions still receive visits. In 2003, historian Dr. Rebecca Lawson published a 400-page study of the case. 3 weeks before release, her university office was ransacked. Only the St. Mary's files were taken. Her hard drive was melted with acid. She withdrew the book. She still gets hang-up calls on the anniversary of the raid, April 17th. Every single year. The Fletcher family farmhouse still stands 15 miles from the old convent grounds. On the kitchen shelf sits the silver cross Sister Mary Collins pressed into 12-year-old Jimmy Fletcher's hand in 1858. Beside it, a list of the 23 names, updated every time a new fragment surfaces. The current patriarch, Robert Fletcher, great-great-grandson, keeps a loaded shotgun by the door. He says the same black car with Illinois plates drives past every April. Slowly, never stops, just looks. Some evils do not die. They migrate. They change their habits for new ones. They wait for the world to forget the sound of 23 women praying in the dark. But the ground at St. Mary's never forgot. And neither did the ones who escaped it. In the end, the only monument the victims ever received is a tiny wild garden in Milwaukee. No plaque. No church approval. Just a circle of white roses that bloom out of season, planted by descendants who still refuse to give their names. Every spring, someone leaves a new flower for each missing nun. Every winter, the snow falls and covers the petals like a clean habit over old wounds. But the roots remain. And roots, given enough time, can break stone. Slow aerial shot over the suburban neighborhood built atop the convent grounds. Children play in cul-de-sacs. Dogs bark. Life moves on. Then the camera drops through the soil, layer by layer, past foundations, past sewer pipes, past the thin crust of forgetting, until it stops on a single pale hand reaching up from the darkness, fingers still curled around a broken wooden rosary. Voiceover soft, almost tender. They buried the truth 6 feet deep, but truth has patience. And one day, when the last person who wanted it silenced is dust, the garden will finish its confession. Until then, remember their names: Sister Agnes O'Connor, Sister Bernarde Walsh, Sister Teresa Donovan, Sister Mary Collins, and all the others whose voices were stolen, but never quite silenced. They were brides of Christ once, and even hell couldn't make them stop praying. Screen fades to black. 23 candles light, one by one. None of them ever go out.